A quiet city buzzed with the usual afternoon life. People walked to lunch, cars moved slowly through traffic, and the sun cast long shadows between tall buildings. In a downtown area known for banks and big businesses, something unusual caught the eye of a local shop owner. He noticed a man standing near an alleyway, not doing anything obvious, just watching. The man wore dark clothes and had a black backpack slung over one shoulder. Something about him didn't feel right. The shop owner called the police. He spoke quickly into the phone, explaining what he saw. "He's been here for a while," he said. "Just standing there. Doesn't look like he belongs." The operator took the report and passed it along. That simple call was enough to set off a chain reaction. Back at the station, officers reviewed the description again and again. Recent warnings about possible attacks in big cities were fresh in their minds. They couldn't afford to ignore anything that looked suspicious. A man with a backpack hanging around a financial district? That was enough for them to take action. Within minutes, patrol cars arrived. Then came armored vehicles. Officers in full tactical gear spread out quietly, eyes scanning every shadow. Word went out to keep civilians away. Streets were blocked, off, and people wondered what was happening. Some peeked from behind windows. Others watched from rooftops. Phones started recording. From above, a helicopter circled low, blades slicing through the air. Snipers took positions on nearby rooftops. Every movement was precise, every officer focused. This was serious. If this man was dangerous, they needed to stop him before it was too late. On the ground, Agent Marcus Reed had no idea what was happening. He wasn't a criminal or a terrorist. He was an FBI agent working undercover. His job today was to watch a suspected money laundering ring operating in the area. He had been taught to blend in, stay unnoticed. That's why he wore plain clothes and carried nothing that would draw attention, except his backpack, which held his notes, a small recorder, and his badge in a hidden compartment. He shifted slightly, feeling something was off. The streets had gone quiet too fast. Then he heard it, a voice booming from a loudspeaker. "Sir, drop the bag and get on the ground now." Reed froze. He knew how fast situations like this could go wrong. Carefully, calmly, he raised his hands. But there was no time to explain. Dozens of guns were pointed at him. He was about to become the suspect in a terror scare, when all he was doing was his job. The tension in the air was thick like fog. Agent Marcus Reed stood still, hands in the air, heart pounding. Around him, everything moved fast. Shouts from officers, movements of boots on pavement, the sound of weapons being readied. He could see them now, SWAT team members hidden behind. Armored shields, guns aimed directly at him. His backpack sat on the ground where he had carefully placed it, but to them, it might as well have been a bomb. Reed knew he had to stay calm. One wrong move, even a sudden breath, could be seen as a threat. "I'm federal law enforcement," he shouted, his voice firm but controlled. "FBI agent, I'm unarmed." For a moment, there was silence. Just the hum of the helicopter above, and the distant sound of sirens getting closer. Then came the reply, "Don't move. Hands where we can see them." His mind raced. How had this happened? He had done everything right. No badge out, no sudden moves, nothing to draw attention. But now, standing in the middle of a lockdown, he realized that none of that mattered. All they saw was a tall black man with a backpack in a high-risk area. And in that moment, fear had more power than facts. Officers closed in slowly, their training keeping them sharp but also keeping them ready for danger. One mistake could cost lives. That's what they were taught. That's what they believed. So even if this man was telling the truth, they couldn't afford to trust too quickly. Behind the line of officers, a commander spoke into his radio. "We need an ID check now. Could be real, could be fake. Hold position." Inside the command vehicle, agents scrambled to verify the name and badge number Reed had shouted out. It would take time he didn't know he had. Above, people watched. From office windows, phones raised. Some filmed, others whispered nervously. Was this a terrorist being taken down, or a terrible mistake? Reed stood alone in the center of it all, sweating under the pressure, waiting for someone to believe him. He wasn't scared for his life. He trusted the system, even if it had turned its guns on him. But deep inside, a quiet hurt grew. Not because they were doing their job, but because once again he was being treated like the enemy, just because of how he looked. Still, he stayed still. Hands up, waiting. Agent Marcus Reed had spent years earning his place in the FBI. He wasn't just a field agent, he was good at what he did. Blending in, staying sharp, thinking fast, these were skills that kept him alive during undercover missions. But standing there with guns pointed at him, he realized none of that mattered right now. His mind flashed back to where he'd been just hours earlier that morning. In a quiet office building across town, he sat in a small briefing room with his team. The case they were working on was serious, a money laundering ring tied to a powerful crime group. They had followed the trail for weeks. Today was the day they believed they might finally catch someone in the act. "Marcus," his supervisor had said, "you're our eyes out there. Don't draw attention, just watch and report." He nodded. Understood. So he dressed like a regular guy, grabbed his backpack with his notes and recorder inside and headed out. His badge, hidden. His weapon, locked away in the car. He wasn't supposed to carry it today. This was about watching, not acting. Now, standing alone in the middle of a street takeover, he thought about how strange it was that doing exactly what he was told had landed him here, hands up, surrounded by officers who saw a threat, not an agent. Behind the helmets and shields, he could see the focus in their eyes. They weren't being cruel. They were doing what they had trained for, keeping people safe. But safety came with fear, and fear made them slow to believe him. "I'm telling you the truth," he called out again, voice steady. "I work for the government. I have my badge in my bag." A short pause. Then a voice shouted back, "Don't move." Minutes ticked by. It felt like hours. Inside the command truck, agents worked fast. They typed furiously on laptops, running his name, checking databases. At first, nothing came up fast enough. Mistakes happened. False reports, fake IDs, it wasn't unheard of. And they had to be sure. Then, a match appeared on the screen. "Oh my God," one officer muttered. "It's real." The commander stepped forward, radio in hand. He spoke into it clearly. "Hold position. Wait for confirmation." Reed didn't know it yet, but the moment of truth was getting closer. Soon they would believe him. But for now he stood still, heart racing. Not from fear, but from frustration. How many times had this happened to men who looked like him? Would it have taken longer if he hadn't been who he was? Would anyone have listened? But he stayed calm. Not because it was easy, but because he knew what was at stake. And he was waiting for someone to finally hear him. Agent Marcus Reed had trained his whole life for moments like this, but not like this. He had faced down criminals, stood in the line of fire, and walked away from danger more times than he could count. But never before had that danger come from his own side. One officer stepped forward slowly, weapon still raised but lowered slightly. "Sir, do not move," he said again, voice firm but not unkind. Reed didn't move. The officer reached for the backpack, pulling it open with a gloved hand. Inside were folders, a small digital recorder, and tucked inside a hidden pocket, his badge. The officer held it up, turning it so others could see. A pause. A radio crackled. Then from the command post came a sharp voice. "Confirming ID now." But even as the truth started to take shape, the tension didn't fade. Not yet. "Fear is slow to leave once it's settled in. Stay on your knees," someone shouted. Reed obeyed. He knew how fast things could go wrong. He had seen videos. Men who spoke out of fear, who moved too suddenly, who lost their lives over misunderstandings just like this one. He wasn't going to give anyone a reason to doubt him, even if it hurt. Behind the helmet visors, officers exchanged glances. Some were confused, others looked uneasy. Others, they had been ready for a terrorist and found an FBI agent instead. Minutes passed. Then finally a new voice broke through the silence. Calmer, more sure. He's real. Stand down. Like a switch flipping, the guns began to lower. One by one, officers stepped back. The tight circle around Reed opened slightly. Two men approached, one from SWAT, another from the command team. The older of the two offered a hand. "Agent Reed," he said, "we're sorry about this. We had to be sure." Reed took the hand and stood slowly, brushing off his pants. He nodded. "I understand," he said, though his voice was quiet, tired. He looked around at the scene they had created. The streets slowly came back to life. The armored vehicles rolled away, the yellow caution tape was cut loose, and people who had been watching from a distance began to move again. But for Agent Marcus Reed, the world still felt heavy. He stood, off to the side now, no longer surrounded by guns, but not exactly free of tension either. A few officers lingered nearby, some avoiding his eyes, others watching him carefully, as if trying to understand how they had gotten this wrong. One SWAT officer walked up with a quiet nod. "Sir, we're really sorry," he said, voice low. "We saw what we thought we needed to see." Reed looked at him and gave a small, tired smile. "I know," he said. "You were doing your job." But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't that simple. A short distance away, reporters had arrived. Cameras rolled, phones pointed in every direction. Word had spread fast. SWAT detains a man in a terror scare only to find out he's FBI. It was shocking, confusing, and more than a little ironic. Someone whispered, "Can you believe it?" Inside Reed, a storm brewed beneath a calm surface. He had spent years working hard to earn respect in a world that didn't always give it freely. He had followed every rule, done everything right. And still here he was, treated like a danger before being seen as a protector. A local police commander approached, looking serious. "Agent Reed, we're going to need to go over what happened today, just for the report." Reed nodded. Of course." They walked toward a quieter area. The commander cleared his throat. "This won't be public for long. You know how fast things spread." "I do," Reed replied. "And I know people will have questions." "They already are," the commander admitted. "Some say you were lucky. Others are asking, what if you hadn't been who you were?" Reed stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the real question, isn't it?" Because deep down he knew. This wasn't just about him. It was about how fear could change the way people saw each other. How a backpack and skin color could turn an agent of the law into a suspect. He looked around at the city waking up again. Life would keep moving. But for him, something had shifted. He had survived another day, but surviving wasn't the same as being safe. Not really. What started as a quiet afternoon turned into something much bigger overnight. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. News stations played clips from shaky phone videos. Agent Marcus Reed on his knees, surrounded by SWAT officers, hands in the air. Headlines read, "FBI agent mistaken for terrorist." Some reports added a word that made people pause. "Undercover agent detained by own country." Public reaction came fast and loud. On social media, people were divided. Some praised law enforcement for being careful, saying they did the right thing by taking no chances in a time of fear. Others were angry. "This never would have happened to a white man," one post read. Another said, "He was doing his job and almost lost his life because of how he looks." Talk shows picked it up. Experts debated. Police supporters defended the officers, saying they acted on what they knew. Community leaders saw something deeper, a sign of a broken system where black men were too often seen as threats before citizens. Inside law enforcement circles, the mood was tense. Officers talked in hushed tones at the station. Some felt unfairly judged. They hadn't known who Reed was. They had followed their training. But others couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. Not just with this case, but with how different agencies shared information. Why hadn't someone known he was out there? Why wasn't he marked as friendly? Behind closed doors, commanders met in urgent sessions. Internal Affairs opened a review. Not to punish, not yet, but to understand. Was this a failure of communication? Of judgment? Of bias? Reed stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't give interviews or speak to reporters. Instead, he went back to work quietly, pretending everything was fine. But inside, he replayed the moment over and over. The way fear had changed how people looked at him, the way trust vanished in seconds. His colleagues tried to act normal around him. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others avoided eye contact, entirely unsure what to say. One friend finally asked him, "How are you holding up?" Reed thought for a long moment before answering. "I'm okay," he said, "but I keep wondering, what if I hadn't been me?" No one had an answer to that, because the truth was, mistakes like this weren't rare, and until real change happened, they wouldn't stop happening, to him or anyone else who looked like him. Days turned into weeks, but the story didn't fade. Instead, it grew louder. What started as a tense street encounter had become something bigger, a moment people couldn't ignore. Across the country, conversations picked up in homes, schools, and city halls. People asked the same question over and over. Could this happen to me? Inside the FBI, things were changing, slowly. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Commanders reviewed old rules about interagency communication. They talked about how Agent Marcus Reed had been doing his job, yet no one had known who he was. Mistakes like that shouldn't happen, not between agencies that were supposed to work together. New protocols started taking shape. Officers now had faster ways to verify if someone claiming to be law enforcement was telling the truth. There were new training sessions too, not just about guns and tactics, but about trust, fear, and how quickly assumptions could go wrong. Agent. Reed didn't ask for any of this, but he found himself at the center of it all. At first, he kept quiet. He wasn't looking for attention or praise. But then, after thinking for a long time, he agreed to speak at an internal meeting with officers from different departments. He stood in front of the room, calm but serious. "I understand why you did what you did," he said. "You were trained to protect people. That's what we all do. But I also know what it feels like to be seen as a threat before being seen as a person." His words stayed with those who heard them. Some officers nodded. Others looked away, thinking about how they might have reacted in that moment. Outside the halls of law enforcement, changes were happening too. Community leaders used Reed's story to push for better understanding between police and the neighborhoods they served. Schools invited speakers to talk about bias and fairness. In some cities, new programs helped cops and civilians talk face-to-face, something small but meaningful. The world hadn't changed overnight. Not everything got fixed. But something had shifted. Marcus Reed went back to his work, quieter than before but still strong. He knew the road ahead was long. He also knew that moments like his could either divide people or bring them closer if they chose to learn from them. And maybe, just maybe, that one mistake had sparked something good after all. Months passed, but the lessons from that day stayed with everyone who watched or took part in what happened. The video no longer played on every news channel, and the headlines had moved on. But for many people, especially those in law enforcement and the communities they served, the memory lingered. Agent Marcus Reed returned to his work without fanfare. He didn't ask for recognition or special treatment. He simply kept doing his job, quietly and well. But inside, he carried something new. Not anger, not bitterness, just a deeper understanding of how fragile trust could be. One day, during a community outreach meeting, he sat across from a group of young men from a local youth center. They looked at him with curiosity, maybe even a little doubt. To them, police were often seen as distant figures, sometimes unfair, sometimes scary. He spoke plainly. "I know it's hard to believe," he said, "but even people like me get treated like suspects. I've stood where you stand, wondering if the system sees me as a person first, or something else." The room grew quiet. One boy asked, "You're serious? They really thought you were dangerous?" Reed nodded. "They did. Not because I was doing anything wrong, but because fear can make us see things that aren't there. That moment wasn't about blame or politics. It was about truth. Truth that mistakes happen, that fear can cloud judgment, and that trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Across town, inside a police training room, officers reviewed footage from that day, not as a failure, but as a lesson. They talked about how assumptions can shape actions before facts have a chance to speak. How one man, doing nothing wrong, could become the center of a citywide operation simply because he looked like a threat. One officer raised his hand. "What would you have done differently?" he asked. A senior trainer answered, "Listened sooner, checked faster, trained ourselves not just to react, but to question. Because that's what real safety is built on. Not just force, but understanding." And so change came slowly, but surely. Not in big steps, but in small ones. Like better communication, more awareness, and honest conversations between people who used to only see each other from a distance. The story of Agent Reed became more than a headline.